Okay, we've talked about what happens in the mouth, we've talked about what happens in the stomach, we talked about what happened in the small intestine, and we talked about the accessory parts that help with digestion, that are associated with the with those different regions. Now we're going to talk about the large intestine. So, by the end of the small intestine, chemical digestion has been complete. So we're still talking about the digestion phase of digestion process. Okay, so the large intestine, we said, is also known as the colon or the large bowel. It is shorter, but it's wider. The diameter is wider. Sorry. Charlie's pretending he's talking to my mom on the phone. He's just super loud, but cute. Okay. So, like we said, chemical digestion is complete by the time it reaches the large intestine. Okay, there are certain regions of the large intestine, and if you remember building your body, you had this piece, which is the cecum, and then you had a piece going upwards, which is the ascending colon. Ascend means go up. Then you have a part going across, that's the transverse colon. Transverse means go across. Descending colon here, that's going down, and then the sigmoid is S shape, so sigmoid colon is here, and then the rectum is the last section. Now sometimes it's included as a separate part, and sometimes it's included as part of the large intestine. It depends what resource you're using. That's why I have a question mark here. Okay, so the main functions of the large intestine, basically, we know they store wastes until it's time to excrete them, and thankfully it's a voluntary movement, so we usually control that, although there are times when we can't, but we usually have control over that. And sensors will tell our brains when it's time, but we still have control when we release the valve. Main function, water and some inorganic salts are reabsorbed. So it comes into the large intestine still fairly liquefied, but by the time we excrete it from our bodies, it's usually fairly solid, depending on what we've eaten. Sometimes it can be a little more fluid or runny. And sometimes if you're having a reaction to something, like if you have lactose intolerance or something like that, then if you have something with milk, or if you're allergic to something, maybe you're allergic to gluten, then you'll probably have more water go out with your feces and it'll be more runny. Okay, so, but usually the large intestine will absorb a lot of the water. And some of the inorganic salts will be reabsorbed here. It has bacteria that live in here, which can be good for us. Normally they're kept in a proper kind of amount, but sometimes they can kind of take over and then we can be sick. But normally we have some that live there, and they will actually make vitamins for us. So they can convert some of our wastes and give us some vitamin B and vitamin K. Okay, so some of the functions: it stores wastes until we excrete them. It absorbs water and some of the inorganic salts, and it has bacteria in it that can convert some of our wastes to give us vitamins. So let's label it on the diagram. So the first part of the large intestine is the cecum. The part going upwards is the ascending colon. Part going across is the transverse colon. So this is an extra line. There's two lines here. So we're going to use one of them just to say large intestine. Okay, the transverse colon. This one going downward is the descending colon. And then the S-shaped part is the sigmoid colon. And the last part is the rectum, and then the opening at the end is the anus. There's one thing that we missed, and that's this part here. But we didn't miss it on purpose. It's the appendix. Okay, so that's why if you get pains in your lower right side, that's where it's at, then it could be a sign, excuse me, a sign that you have appendicitis. So infection or inflammation of the appendix, which is not good because it could rupture and release a whole lot of toxins in you. And I already told you that my little fella has already had his removed, so it is not useful to us anymore, but it's believed that in early times it was a little excess region that would house bacteria and things that would help us to break down like leaves and things like that. So like maybe in the age of when people lived in caves and things like that, then they would eat more plant-like materials and so needed help digesting that stuff because we can't break down cellulose. So cellulose for us passes through our intestines. We talked about it earlier. It provides roughage, so it kind of helps things move through our pipes, move through our digestive tract, because we don't have enzymes that can break it down. So, the first phase of digestion was ingestion, taking food in. The second phase is the actual digestion part. So that ends our talk about digestion itself. The third phase is absorption. So we talked about absorbing water. Yep. But we also need to talk about absorption of nutrients. So absorption happens in these three main regions. There's a little bit that can happen in your mouth too. But most of it happens in the small intestine. In your stomach, some water and some vitamins. Remember, water and vitamins are small enough, they can be absorbed right away. And glucose, so if you had a chocolate bar or candy, then a lot of those will have simple sugars already. So once you start like sucking on a candy or breaking apart a chocolate bar, then some of those will be freed up and they can be absorbed right away. So that's why you get a sudden energy rush for them. Alcohol can also be absorbed in your stomach. So that's why they say that it gets absorbed a lot faster if you don't have much food in your stomach. Because it doesn't have to try and compete with the other stuff that's in your stomach. It just gets absorbed right into the wall. Oh, shoot. Did it again. Okay. The small intestine, as I said, is the site of most absorption. That's why it needs to be so long, because the digestion happens and the absorption happens. Not all digestion, not all absorption, but the bulk of it happens in the small intestine. So it's a really important part of your body. In your large intestine, we said vitamins and more water are absorbed. So, surface area is important. That's why our small intestine has to be really long. We need to have lots of surface area to be able to absorb as much as we do. So not only is it long, but inside of it, the small intestine, if I took the wall and I blew it up, it has a whole lot of these little finger-like projections in it. So these are called villi. And there's a whole lot of villi, a bed of villi that line your whole small intestine. So they are finger-like projections that help to increase the surface area available for digestion and absorption, especially absorption. Okay. But at the top of them are absorptive cells, and at the very top of those cells are microvilli. So there's tiny, tiny little finger-like projections that come off the top of the main finger-like projections, the villi. So that increases the surface area even more. If we didn't have villi and microvilli, then our small intestine would have to be 10 times longer and we would have to be much bigger. Inside of each villus, this is something that you could draw pretty simply, so we'll probably go over a sketching class. But inside of each villus, there's this green vessel called a lacteal. Oh, darn. Gosh, this is sensitive. Okay, so inside is the green vessel called the lacteal, and that is part of the lymphatic system. So, frustrated. Okay, it's part of the lymphatic system. So there's capillaries in here that can absorb certain things that are small enough, and there's a lacteal in here to absorb the things that are kind of bigger and bulky and can't go right into the capillaries. So inside the villi, we have a capillary bed and a lacteal, and then we have an artery down here that the capillaries would have been receiving blood from. So it carries blood to the villus, and then a vein will carry the blood away. And the capillary bed is where some of the things that are small enough will be picked up and then carried away by the vein to be carried to the rest of your cells. The lymphatic vessels will carry lymph to this area, but pick up the things that are kind of too big and bulky to go into the capillaries. So, what is picked up by what? The end products of carbohydrate and protein digestion are really small. So, end products of carbohydrate, when we break them down completely, we get things like glucose, so monosaccharides. So, monosaccharides and then amino acids, which are what we get when we break down proteins, they're really small. So, they can go in through the capillaries and then be carried away by a vein. They're carried to the hepatic portal system to the liver, and then they'll be, the blood will be clean, kind of, and then it'll be sent so that we get enough nutrients to all the tissues. For fat digestion, glycerol and fatty acids are kind of bulkier, and so they can't get into the capillaries. They instead are picked up by the lacteals. Okay, and so they hook up from the lacteal to go into the lymphatic vessels and carried with the lymph to the left subclavian vein, so they'll get back into your circulatory system. Okay, so the end products of carbohydrates and proteins are small enough, so monosaccharides and amino acids are small enough, they'll just be picked up by, let's go back up here, they'll be picked up by the capillaries, so the red and blue, purple things. But what we get from the breakdown of fats, which are fatty acids and glycerol, they get picked up by the lacteal and the lymphatic vessels. Okay, so that's it for the information, except for the disorders. And the disorders we can talk about in class, or you can look at on the website. There's a link for them too. You might want to take a look at these questions. I wouldn't worry about the herbal supplements. It's interesting, but I wouldn't worry about them. But these are some review questions that you can kind of take a look at. I think our hemorrhoids listed up there too. I know they're on your other things, so they're not on this part, but they are on your sheet. So we'll go over them in class, or you can look on the link on the website. So that's it for this chapter.